Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the video for Module 4. So this is complicated, and what I want to talk about in this short video and what I want to get across in this module is sort of this contrast between economic systems of socialism and capitalism. And the reason it's important is because as we look into these arguments against universal health care, against the ACA and other programs, oftentimes you'll hear people say, hey, this is socialism and that's not acceptable in the United States. And the reality is that our country is based on a combination of socialism and capitalism, and you could spend a whole semester talking about these economic theories, but we're just going to spend a few minutes because it's important as you read through these debates to understand why people object to or favor universal health care. So the title of the module is Commies, Pinkos, and Freedom, and those words, commies and pinkos, really refer to slang terms for communist and socialist, and those economic concepts have always been really touchy in the U.S. because we are a laissez-faire capitalist society, and when we talk about the notion of individualism, in that, hey, I get a good job, I work hard, I go to school, I should be able to keep all my money, and the government should stay out of my business, that's sort of this theory of individualism based on a capitalist model. On the other hand, there is socialism, which in the classic sense talks about the government owning all the means of production. In other words, the government controlling business, and then at the same time, the government, which is the people in this case, redistributes benefits to all of society. So it's this idea that you share everything you have, and everything that society produces is shared in common. And that really goes against the grain of freedom and liberty, and that's sort of where the history part comes in, because if you go all the way back to the early 1600s, when the first British settlers landed in North America, the whole ethos of these colonists, it was about making profit, making money, whether it was through the selling of tobacco or other goods and services when the colonies first began in the 1600s. So there's a lot to this, and I hope that it helps us connect this notion of history, and when I say that, I mean that history is really just the developing past. So this idea of making it on your own, doing what you want with your money, an unintrusive government is powerful because it goes all the way back to the beginnings of this nation. So let's start by looking at a couple of classic definitions. So the classic definition of socialism is that it's an economic and political theory which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. So that means everything you do is governed in some sense in a socialist society, and wealth is redistributed, and everyone benefits as part of the community. So that's the classic definition of socialism. And the thing that you need to understand there is when you look at this classic definition and you read that the means of production and distribution are controlled by the community as a whole, this really implies something more like communism, where the state, if you will, owns all the factories and controls everything. Very similar to the Russian setup right now, and also the Chinese setup right now, where the government really has their hands in production and controls everything. As far as countries like Canada and countries in Western Europe, Germany, France, there's sort of this prevailing thought that they're socialist countries, but they really don't fit this pure definition, because the government doesn't own the businesses, does not control the means of production. So really, you have to understand that these definitions, there's really no pure societies that sign onto these economic theories exactly as the way they're described in the definition. So socialism, again, this idea that all businesses, everything you do is owned or regulated by the state or by the government, versus capitalism, which is our primary economic framework in the United States. And the classic definition of capitalism is that it's a political and economic theory in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. And that's what we're all about. You can start a business in the U.S. and there is government regulation, obviously, but for the most part, it's government hands-off when it comes to private enterprise in the U.S. And you might be able to understand how this relates to individualism. Again, this idea of a small, non-intrusive government. So these are the debates that we run into when we talk about universal health care. And what we really have in the United States is really a mix of socialism and capitalism, where we have a free market, we have a democratically elected government, but in turn the government provides adequate public services to ensure all citizens are healthy and safe and enjoy a certain quality of life. So that's what we have right now. When you think about the socialist aspects of the United States right now, you can think in terms of Medicaid, you can think in terms of food stamp programs and welfare programs. And some would debate that Social Security and Medicare are also socialist programs, but you have to be a little careful there, because in the case of Social Security and Medicare, we as workers contribute. So in other words, the government doesn't fund these programs, nor do they really redistribute wealth in a classic sense, because we pay into these funds and hopefully we'll get our money back out when it's time for us to retire or when we need Medicare. So the point is that these definitions are not black and white. When you hear someone say, hey, this is a socialist initiative or this smacks of capitalism, take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of gray area in between these definitions. So how does this all relate to whether or not healthcare is a right or a privilege? Because historically, the political debates over all these social programs come down to this idea of government control. And again, if you want to connect the history, if you remember from our last module or the module before, when we talked about the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, there is this implication from the beginnings of our government that you have a right to some happiness, you have a right to a job, you have a right to liberty. So we have to kind of sort out what rights we have. And the most important thing is who pays for them, because the government just doesn't create wealth. We, the workers, we, the people, are the ones who work and create wealth, and everything that the government has as far as funding is concerned comes from taxes, which in turn come from us, usually out of our paychecks, or in the case of property taxes are also prevalent. So if depending upon your definition, you could public school, you could say is a socialist initiative, because you're forced to go to public school, or your kids are forced to go to school, and you have no choice but to fund public schools either through property taxes or state taxes. So there's a lot of things that technically could be considered socialist, but we accept them as part of this idea of the right to happiness, the right to health. So when we go through these debates about the ACA, again, the people who are against the ACA or other universal healthcare systems are really saying, hey, I've worked hard for my money, I'm responsible enough to save up and take care of my own health care, and the government shouldn't be telling me what to do. So that's one of the arguments against socialized medicine. On the other hand, argument towards socialized medicine is that if everyone's healthier in the country, healthcare costs go down. So there are some proven economic benefits to socialized healthcare, and that from a standpoint of empathy and compassion, capitalism on its surface can be sort of cold-hearted. In other words, I make my money, I keep my money, I make the decisions on what I'm going to pay for, and I really don't care about anyone else in the community. So those are the two opposing viewpoints, and I just want you to understand what these systems are and what these words relate to, because as we go through subsequent modules, you're going to look at debates against universal health care, and then also I want you to form your own opinions about universal health care, and you have to think about this idea: do you want to share what you earn, or do you want to be strictly an individualist and keep hold of everything that you have, at the same time understanding that if you need public benefits, that they're not there for you. So it's sort of a black or white, one side or the other debate. So that's it for now. Read the reading notes for this module, understand the difference between socialism and capitalism, but also understand how our current framework and our current economy is really a combination of both of those things. When it comes to the healthcare debate, it's really just a matter of the extent that we fund services for other people. So that's it for now. Have a great day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.